Hello, today I am doing the spoiler book tag, a tag that was originally created by Gunpowder Fiction Plot. This tag consists of questions about the topic of spoilers, specifically when it comes to books, what we define as a spoiler, how we feel about them, our own experiences with giving and or receiving them, so let's get started. Question 1. What do you consider a spoiler? There are definitely some major things that come to mind. I think perhaps the biggest kind of spoiler there is somebody dying. I think that's definitely a big one. That's often what people consider a spoiler if a character dies. I mean, if it's something that happens like before the events of the book or right at the beginning, then people would likely know that about the book. But I mean, if it's something that happens later in the book, then yeah, that's definitely a spoiler. I think if it's a mystery, if there's any kind of mystery, even if it's not primarily a mystery book, if it's got any kind of mystery, then the answer to the mystery I think would be considered a spoiler. So those are definitely the main kinds of things that come to mind when it comes to spoilers. I think if it's any kind of plot twist, any major change in the plot, then that could count as well. I think when it comes to romantic relationships, like if anybody gets together or breaks up, especially if it is not primarily a romance novel, then that could also be considered a spoiler. Now, if I'm reading a synopsis for a romance novel and I hear these two characters described, I think it can be assumed that they will get together. So that is a little different, and that ties in with question 2. Does the genre you're reading impact what you consider to be a spoiler? So romance is definitely what I think of when I hear that question. Now, I think that if it's the kind of story where the main character has to choose between two different people, then yeah, I wouldn't want to know what the outcome of that is. I think that would be a spoiler. But if I just hear about these two characters, then I think in most cases it could be assumed that they get together and stay together. However, if I'm reviewing a romance novel, especially if I'm trying to make it spoiler free, I may not necessarily say something about them officially getting together, but I can still comment on their relationship. And we know from the synopsis that there's going to be some sort of interaction between the two. But just talking about somebody's relationship does not mean that it is a romantic one. And backtracking to the first question of what I consider to be a spoiler, I think that not everything would be. If it's something really trivial, like if someone says they play Mario Kart, that's probably not a spoiler because I don't think that's a major plot point. It could be, but in the cases where I've read it, it's not. That could just be something someone could say to get them interested in the book. And I think that the general synopsis of the book is information that you're supposed to know before reading it, or at least could know if you wanted to know, which kind of goes into the third question. The third question says, all the best bits are in the trailer. Sometimes a synopsis can be too detailed. Do you research books prior to reading them, or do you prefer to know nothing about the book? I understand preferring to know nothing about the book, and I understand that that's how some people go into it. I know some people have recommended not looking up reviews before reading a book so that you can fully develop your own opinion, and while I do think that reading other people's reviews can influence your thoughts, I think for me, I'm definitely just going to develop my own opinion and decide how I feel about it. However, to answer this question, well, I don't ever read, buy, or check out a book without knowing anything about it, unless it's like a blind book or something like that. A cover can catch my attention, and it has, but I don't buy books just based on what the cover looks like. I have to know at least a little bit about it. So maybe the cover will catch my attention, or maybe I hear about it or see it some other way, and I will read the synopsis and decide for myself if it sounds interesting. So I like to know at least a little bit about a book because otherwise I have no reason to want to read it. Because a pretty cover doesn't really tell me or guarantee anything. So I don't really read a bunch of reviews prior to reading a book. I may look it up on Goodreads and see if any people I know have read it, but even then, I will still want to read it for myself and develop my own opinion because a book, well, this could apply to a movie as well, but a book is even longer. It's a whole big thing and everyone experiences them differently, especially with the book because people imagine things differently. So I could have a completely different experience. There could be things in the book that are specifically for me and not other people. So even if I see a book and everyone's rated it low, I'm still going to see for myself what I think of it. Unless if they're saying things that tell me that I would not like the book, like if they mention that there are certain things in it, then yeah, maybe I'm less likely to like it. But I still like to see for myself what I think of it. So yeah, I like to do a little bit of research before reading books, but I don't always do like a deep dive into them. But I at least need to know the synopsis and a little bit of information about the book. Question 4. Sometimes the introduction or translator's notes can spoil the ending, especially for classics. Has this ever happened to you? Not that I can think of. I haven't read a lot of classics. I haven't read a lot of really old books. I did read The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen earlier this year, and I had already heard some of the things that happened in that story, but it wasn't from when I actually read the book itself. That was just from, I don't know, the fact that it's a popular story and I heard about what happens in it somewhere. But I don't think I've ever been spoiled specifically by the introduction or translator's notes of a book. Question 5. Name a time somebody spoiled a novel for you. I think that usually happens online. I know there was one time with a book, and I do still plan on reading it, but there was a book that I heard about, and I looked at it on Goodreads, and I was just casually looking through the reviews. I don't think I even clicked on the reviews. I just saw like the first 3 or so that pop up, and somebody, I just am scrolling through. I'm just skimming through them. I'm not even fully reading them. I'm just kind of looking over, and somebody says something about the main character dies. And the review was not marked as a spoiler. You may know if you use Goodreads that if you have a spoiler, and I would definitely call that a spoiler, you are supposed to mark the review with spoilers. Now, that review was a bit old, but I'm pretty sure the spoiler option was there. I don't know if that was like always a thing on Goodreads, but the book came out not that long ago. And upon further inspection on their review, they did put spoilers, like they wrote that, but that's not the same thing as marking it as a spoiler review where you have to click on it to see it. And if you're just skimming through reviews casually, then you may come across that. So I still plan on reading that book. I don't mind. I can still enjoy something even if I know what's going to happen. Like with the Twilight books, I watched the movies first, so I knew everything that was going to happen. Although the books did have some scenes that weren't in the movies. But I still enjoyed it. In fact, for some people, such as people who struggle a lot with anxiety, reading or watching something when they know what's going to happen can actually be a preferred experience because it comforts them. There won't be any unpleasant surprises or twists, and they are comforted in knowing what's going to happen. So I prefer to go into books not knowing anything, but preferably not knowing anything major, anything that I would consider a spoiler from what I mentioned. But if I do find out something, whether it's before I read the book or when I'm in the middle of it, it's a bit disappointing. I'd prefer not to know those things, but I can still enjoy it. Maybe with some things, you could even see if you can detect any foreshadowing of that event that you were spoiled about. So I'm not exactly mad at that Goodreads user, but at the same time, maybe use Goodreads properly. So that's one example I can think of. Question 6. Have you ever spoiled a novel for somebody else? Nothing comes to mind. It's possible that I've mentioned something, but I generally am pretty considerate of it. Even if I'm talking to someone who will likely never read or watch what I'm talking about, I still like to say that. But maybe I'll ask if they're okay with hearing something about it in case they do ever experience it. So generally, I definitely try not to. I wouldn't do it like for fun. As for if I have ever spoiled something for someone else, maybe, but there isn't like one big instance that comes to mind. Question 7. If spoilers ruin novels, are there some authors or genres you can't reread? I wouldn't think so. I mean, if it's like a mystery or something, then, or with anything really, you know what's going to happen. But like I said, that can bring some people comfort, especially if they enjoy the story beyond that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, maybe then if you reread it and you know what's going to happen, you can potentially notice some foreshadowing and seeing if the author left any clues leading up to that, and then maybe you'll be like, how did I not see that? Or something like that. So no, for me, I wouldn't say that there are any authors or genres that I can't reread because of that. Question 8. When reviewing, are you spoiler free? Does this limit your ability to discuss? Well, if it's on Goodreads, usually my reviews are spoiler free. If they do have spoilers though, then I will mark them as with spoilers. In that case, sometimes I will have a review be spoilers on Goodreads if there's a particular thing that I want to get into that I felt strongly about, but I couldn't really talk about it without getting into spoiler territory. My booktube videos are also marked as spoiler-free or not, and even before they were marked that way, I would specify early on in the video. I started putting that in my videos in July. I also think that maybe then more people will watch them if they're aware before clicking on it, if I'm going to get into that or not, if they haven't read the book. Most of my booktube review videos are spoiler-free. One of the only reasons why a review video may be with spoilers is if it's a really big series or book that people are already familiar with. I don't feel that it limits my ability to discuss. I think I can still say a lot about a book without getting into spoilers. And if anyone wants to discuss anything spoiler related in the comments, they can just mark their comment as such and we can still talk about it. Sometimes I have had my review video be spoiler free, but then my Goodreads review does have spoilers, so I tell people if they want to hear my more in-depth thoughts about those things, they can go to my Goodreads profile. The 9th and final question just says, shout out, tell us about 5 channels you enjoy and tag them. So some of the channels I'm going to mention have already done this tag, but this could also just be an opportunity for me to tell you in this moment who are some of the main booktube channels I enjoy. So I'll name a few and put their channels up on screen. So some booktube channels that I really enjoy at the moment are Books with Sam, Book Chat with Pat, Beyond Books, An Autistic Reader, and Stuart Griffin. I know for a fact that some of them have done this tag already. I usually don't tag anyone. I usually just say whoever wants to do this tag can do it. I'm mainly just mentioning them because the prompt says specifically to shout them out. So those are some of my favorite booktube channels at the moment. I watch more than those. I want to check out more though. So if you know of any good ones that I may not be familiar with, please let me know, because I would like to watch more than I do. Although I have been watching more than I did before. All those channels I really enjoy. Some of which I have not been watching as long as others, but I've come to really like them, and then I look at a lot of their old videos and add a lot of them to my watch later. So I think all those channels are really enjoyable, and I think that they are all good at discussing their thoughts on books, and they all just seem like nice people as well. So there are my answers to the spoiler book tag. As always, the questions are in the description if you would like to do this tag as well, and thank you for watching.